With Castle Storm 2 coming out soon, I thought that it'd be fun to review the original Castle Storm. It's a unique mix of several different genres, and it's surprisingly fun. And to be clear, I'll be reviewing the PC version, not the freemium mobile game. So let's get into it. So what is Castle Storm? Castle Storm is a 2D tower defense game that involves some castle building and some side-scrolling action. You can send troops to attack the enemies, you can use different projectiles and magical spells in order to attack the enemy troops and destroy the enemy castle. If you've ever played old Flash games like Age of War, it's kind of like an expanded version of that, and actually it uses the Age of War soundtrack, fun fact. It also has some Angry Birds elements with the destroying the enemy castle, while simultaneously defending your own from the enemy trying to do the same. As a counterpart to that, you can also build and customize your own castle, though I did find the castle builder to be generally hard to use and clunky. Finally, you also control these different heroes to get into the fray of the battle, which is another small side-scroller element to the game. Overall, despite combining elements of so many different genres together, it's not an incredibly complex game, it's actually quite simple. But I think that it can be a great game to play if you want a nice, simple game. It's kind of a brainless and relaxing fun. So in Castle Storm, there are 2 campaigns in the base game, and 2 more in the DLC, which we'll talk more about later. The 2 campaigns allow you to play as 2 different factions, the Kingdom and the Vikings. And these 2 factions have different units, different rooms for your castles, and different projectiles and spells. There are some common room and troop archetypes between them. So for example, each of these 2, the Kingdom and the Vikings, have 1 flying unit. Each of them have 1 large sort of tanky unit. But they also definitely have a unique flair to them with some of the projectiles, some of the spells, and some of the troops that aren't similar between them. The campaign missions themselves are pretty fun. You kind of play them how you want. So you can focus on building troops, you can focus on spells, or you can focus on projectiles, whatever your sort of preferred play style is. There are some missions that have added difficulty, such as you can't use troops this mission, or no hero is allowed in this mission, and stuff like that. And in addition to that, every single mission has an optional bonus, which can be stuff like beat the mission in 2 minutes or only use troops. These optional challenges are usually just a matter of playing the mission in a certain way, so for example, focusing on troops, but sometimes they're kind of just impossible to do on a first pass, and you have to go back to them. So on that note, you can also level up all of your rooms, troops, spells, etc. throughout the campaign. So if you're stuck on any level, or if you want to go back to get 5 stars by completing all the optional challenges and stuff, you can always grind out more levels by playing past missions or playing other game modes, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So there is some progression across the campaign missions, in addition to obviously, going through the story and stuff like that. And on that note, there is a simple but kind of funny story throughout the campaigns. It's very self-aware, which I like. It doesn't take itself too seriously at all, and it has a lot of jokes and references to other things. Also, all the campaigns, including the 2 DLC campaigns, are really sort of one continuous story, told in different parts, and each campaign you sort of focus on a different faction that you play as. And on that note, the ending to the non-DLC campaigns is unsatisfying. I was really disappointed with it. So if you do want the end of the story, let's talk about the DLC section, you should probably get the DLC. But it's not really a game that you would play for the story in the first place. In terms of difficulty, the game is pretty easy, so I'd really recommend playing it on hard, except for maybe some of the hero missions, which are, missions where you only play as a hero instead of manning your castle, because I generally found those missions to be much harder. I also just enjoyed those hero missions much less. I didn't like them as much. And that's partly because the hero controls are a little clunky, or you can kind of get stun locked in these things that I just wasn't really a fan of. And the difficulty also greatly depends on how leveled up your hero is. So unlike other missions where I felt like you could beat them on the first pass, where I felt like you didn't have to level things up, you didn't have to grind at all, I did sometimes feel like with those hero missions that I had to level up my hero in order to progress, which isn't something that I wanted to do. And as I hinted at earlier, there are actually a lot of other game modes. I mostly played the campaign. There's also a survival mode, so it lasts as long as you can. There's a local co-op, so one person will man the castle while the other person mans the hero. And there's a local versus mode where you can have sort of a split screen and play against each other on the same computer. And I will say it's much less common nowadays to have this same screen co-op. I mean, you see some of that, but the same screen versus split screen, that's really uncommon. So if that's a feature that you're looking for, you can definitely check out Castle Storm for one of those type of games. And finally, there is an online multiplayer. You can play custom games, or there's like an online matchmaking, either casual or ranked. Though I will say I couldn't manage to find an online game. I didn't try very long, but I did not get a quick match. So there are a lot of game modes outside of the campaign, and if you're looking for multiplayer, whether co-op or versus, there's definitely that for you, but that was not the best selling point in the game for me personally. So now let's talk briefly about the DLC. So there are 2 different DLCs for this game, from Outcast to Savior and the Warrior Queen. The former gives you another Kingdom faction, while the latter gives you another Viking faction. These 2 DLC factions are different than the original 2 factions, but I would think of them more as variants with small changes rather than truly unique factions. So for example, with the new Kingdom faction, 7 or so out of the 9 troops that you have are basically exactly the same as the regular Kingdom troops, But the other two ones have some small changes. So for example, the Knight will now buff allies, whereas in the regular kingdom, it doesn't. The DLC also introduces some new heroes that you can play as, so if you want some more variety there, that's something they provide as well. If you're interested in the story of the game, you do kind of need to have the DLC to finish that. So the base game and the DLC are sort of one continuous story. As I mentioned earlier, the base game story ends really abruptly. It kind of just finishes. It's not really a cliffhanger, it just kind of ends. But if you get the DLC, it does continue that. You get to see the conclusion, you get to see all the story arcs that are started come to an end. That's probably giving the story of this game too much credit. It's pretty simple. It's not really a game you play for the story. But if you are interested in it, if it has hooked you, you'll need the DLC to see the end of it all. So each DLC has 20 missions, so they're not that long, all things considered, but they're also incredibly cheap. So they're $3 each at full price. You can get them on sale for almost 50 cents each. Overall, I don't think you need the DLC to enjoy the game, but they can be nice if you're really into it. They both add some flavor for the two factions respectively, and they give you more campaign missions to play, which I personally enjoyed because I got bored of the survival modes pretty quickly. But they also don't really add any new game mechanics, and they're only somewhat new factions. There's a lot of similarities and only a couple new twists. I would say the biggest thing the new factions add are probably some new projectiles, but a lot of those are mechanically pretty similar to stuff you've seen in the past. So if you know you'll enjoy the game, feel free to grab them with the base game. You can get them slightly cheaper. Otherwise, I would say try the base game first, see if you like it, and you can grab the DLC later for pretty cheap. So now for my verdict on Castle Storm. Is it worth your time and money? I think it's a fun hybrid of different genres. So if you like Angry Birds, if you like tower defense games, if you like castle building and destroying, then there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy Castle Storm. Also, if you're a fan of games that are just a little different, or if you were a fan of Flash games back in the day like I was, you'll probably also enjoy it. But it's a pretty simple game and just doesn't have a large depth of gameplay. I had a fun 10 or 11 hours out of it, but if you want a game they're going to pour 100 hours into, it's definitely not going to be that game because it's just so simplistic. So I would say at full price, it's probably only worth it for some people, but on sale, you can get the base game for $1 or $2, and you can grab both DLC for about $1 as well. But at those prices, I think it's a good game to check out, and I've definitely got my money's worth. Please like this video to help me out if you found it enjoyable or helpful, and subscribe if you want to see some more of my reviews in the future. Thanks for watching.